Speaking of healthcare, drug stocks have been having a strong week. Shares of Regeneron, AbbVie, Eli Lilly hitting all-time highs today. Our next guest says this is a solid year for what he calls a boring group. Here to break it all down, Jared Holz, Oppenheimer's healthcare equity strategist. Jared, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Who has been the buyer, do you think, this week? I mean, are they specialists or are they tourists looking for defense?
I think it's probably the latter group. Melissa, if I sort of had to guess what's happening, I think some of the stocks that have been doing really, really well in pharma and biotech alike are kind of not so cheap. They're somewhat defensive, but they're not value stocks. They're more growthy than anything else. And this group has done really, really well. So I think it's trying to find safe havens, defensive stocks. You guys just mentioned, names that sort of had these qualities that investors are looking for. And pharma and large cap biotech, for the most part, is giving investors that.
Hey, Jeff Mills here. So we mentioned pharma, and I totally agree. I think you're dealing from a position of strength there. It's not below the 200-day moving average like so many other areas, and healthcare is a place that we've been looking to try to find some opportunities, and it appears to me like it's going to continue to work, sort of this defensive growth area. What is the scenario where it doesn't work and you start to see the relative performance break down?
I think it's just a matter of whether investors are gravitating towards growth or value. And I think pharma still has a value tilt to it. There's obviously some components within that are not. I wouldn't really define Eli Lilly as value or Regeneron. And those are two stocks that have done really, really well out of the gate here, and particularly as of late. But I think anytime you get a real growthy sort of rotation back into small and mid caps where we see investors sort of flock towards those areas, pharma gets a little bit less interesting, maybe on a relative basis, but I don't think we're there yet. I still think the group probably has upside from here.
In terms of the smaller to mid cap sort of biotech names, Jared, we've had you on in the past just about how unloved this group has been over the past, 5 years or so. So when you say large cap biotech, we get that. That's mostly IBB. But if you take a look at XBI, for instance, what sort of backdrop do investors need to see in the market in order to get them back in?
Yeah, definitely. This XBI has been maybe the most frustrating or confounding area in all of healthcare lately. It probably takes a few things. I mean, there have been 352 biotech IPOs since 2018. So that's 4 years and less than 3 months. And we've seen, on average, 80 plus IPOs. That's a lot of companies in one sort of complex. And, you throw on another 400 to 500 that are publicly traded and all these private companies in the loop as well. There's probably a glut of these companies that kind of have to self-fix. And I think, data's been very spotty. Don't need to get into all the details, but this has been a pretty poor period for clinical trial results on the whole. And then we've discussed this too, Melissa, and I think the M&A trade is one where investors are so keyed in on, a lot of them own biotech just for acquisitions, and the environment has been a lot slower than we thought. So I think some self-fixing, some of these companies sort of need to figure out who they are. The data's got to get better. And then I do think some deal activity would make sense. And just to sort of put it into perspective, the large cap pharma group we were talking about earlier probably has north of $500 billion to spend. In my mind, investors look at the group and they're looking for top line growth. And if you can get that growth vis-a-vis acquisition, we're probably going to see more of it.
Jared, it's Karen. Let me ask you to just drill down specifically. Where do you come out on Lilly's Alzheimer's drug? How do you think this plays out?
Well, they just delayed it by a bit. It's a very, very close call, Karen. I mean, I just wrote about this recently. I think when I look at pharma in general as a category, there are two major markets that I think can attract investors. One is Alzheimer's, the other is obesity. Lilly is literally the only company out there that gives you a call option, so to speak, in both of those categories. It's the only one. So I think even if you're not super bulled up on Alzheimer's, and I truly do feel like it's more of a coin flip than anything else, but if you're somewhat positively biased that they can get this drug approved and they kind of use a different methodology to get it through the FDA and the pricing dynamic is decent, unlike Biogen's sort of foray into the market, then you layer on obesity, which is a massive epidemic, global epidemic, obviously. then Lilly's probably one of the best long-term holdings you can have. Now, it's trading at 28 times earnings on next year's numbers, so it's double the multiple for the group. But I think you kind of have to own it here long-term.
Jared, great to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Jared Holz of Oppenheimer. We put up his long-term picks, AbbVie and Eli Lilly. J&J is short-term pick of Jared's. Guy, what do you make of these names?
We haven't run from Lilly. I'll stay there. I mean, he's right. It's trading at close to 30 times next year's numbers. I totally get it. But if they're able to figure out Alzheimer's, to Karen's point, the holy grail in big cap pharma, I mean, this stock goes to $400 easy, and that's not hyperbole. I do have a decent memory, and I remember, I think it was on Monday, that Karen had Merck as her final trade. I'm with her on that, and we've talked about Bristol Myers now for quite some time. Very quietly made a 6-year high today, and I think there's still some room on the upside with that one.
I'm with Guy. I think his final trade on Monday was Bristol Myers. Mine was Merck. But so I'm long Lilly. It's the most expensive of the space for the reasons he said. Right, it's the holy grail also, if you can, but it is a big if, we don't know. And then I like Pfizer and AbbVie, which you also mentioned.